Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by Constantine in the dark arts. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The final bell at Aldera Junior High didn't so much signal freedom as it did the start of a different kind of prison. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the shriek of a starting pistol for a race he always lost. The classroom, a sterile box of beige walls and scratched wooden desks, emptied with the chaotic energy of a burst dam. Shouts and laughter echoed down the hallway, the sounds of a life he could only observe from behind a pane of thick, soundproof glass. He kept his head down, his movements small and deliberate as he packed his bag. The goal was invisibility. If he could just blend into the wood grain of his desk, become another scuff mark on the linoleum floor, maybe he could get through one day unscathed. A heavy hand slammed down on his desk, rattling the wood and making him jump so hard his teeth clicked. Still haven't packed up yet, Deku? Izuku didn't need to look up to know who it was. The voice was a familiar brand of casual cruelty, laced with the crackle of tiny explosions. Katsuki Bakugo loomed over him, flanked by his two usual cronies, their shadows swallowing what little light reached Izuku's corner of the room. Thinking about your future? Bakugo sneered, snatching the notebook from Izuku's hands before he could react. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. His life's work. His impossible dream. Give it back, Kakin! Izuku pleaded, his voice a pathetic squeak. He hated how small he sounded. Hero Analysis for the Future? One of the lackeys read over Bakugo's shoulder, snickering. Seriously? You still on this crap? You're quirkless. Bakugo's grin was all sharp edges. He held the notebook between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were something filthy. You know, Deku, he said, his voice dangerously low. Most of the top heroes have a story about their school days. I want to make sure my story is perfect. That means no useless, quirkless wannabes from my alma mater tarnishing my reputation. Without another word, he placed his palm flat against the notebook. There was a sharp crack pop and a burst of acrid smoke. Izuku watched in horror as the cover of his notebook blackened, the edges curling into ash. Bakugo then tossed the smoldering remains out the open window. Izuku's gasp was silent, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. He could only stare, frozen, as his hard work, his hopes, fluttered down towards the koi pond below. You know, Bakugo said, leaning in close, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. The smell of nitroglycerin was sharp in his nostrils. If you want a quirk so bad, there's a really easy way. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with one in your next life. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy as lead. The two other boys laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Bakugo just turned and walked away, hands stuffed in his pockets, the very picture of arrogant nonchalance. He had just suggested suicide to his childhood friend and didn't even break his stride. For a long time, Izuku just stood there, the ghost of Bakugo's words echoing in the empty classroom. The laughter died down the hall, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the frantic, painful thumping of his own heart. He felt hollowed out, a fragile shell with nothing inside but dust and echoes. Slowly, numbly, he made his way outside. He found his notebook floating in the murky water of the koi pond, the ink bleeding across the pages, turning his meticulous notes and drawings into a soupy, illegible mess. The fish nibbled at the charred corners. He fished it out, cradling the soggy, ruined book to his chest. It felt like holding a corpse. The walk home was a blur. The world seemed too bright, too loud. Cheerful advertisements for hero-themed merchandise mocked him from shop windows. Children with minor quirks played in the park, their laughter like shards of glass in his ears. Every smiling face, every display of casual power, was a reminder of what he was not. What he could never be. He was a defective product in a world of superheroes. An aberration. A mistake. He thought of his mother. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when he talked about heroes anymore. The way she would apologize, tears welling up, for the genetic lottery he had lost. He loved her more than anything, but her pity was a gentle suffocation, another layer of weight pressing down on him. He thought of All Might's words from that video, the one he had watched 1,000, maybe 10,000 times. Anyone can be a hero! But All Might had a quirk. Everyone had a quirk. The words were meant for them, not for him. They were a message of hope addressed to a world he wasn't truly a part of. But those words came back to him. Take a swan dive. He wasn't going to. He wasn't. But the thought had been planted, a dark seed in the ruined soil of his heart. What was the point of a life spent looking up from the ground, forever dreaming of a sky you could never reach? He found himself walking in a different direction, away from the familiar path to his apartment. He was moving on autopilot, his feet carrying him towards one of the taller office buildings downtown, one he knew had a publicly accessible roof. He wasn't going to jump. He just needed some air. He needed to be somewhere high up. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere he could be completely, utterly alone with the vast emptiness that was consuming him from the inside out. The rooftop was a stark landscape of gray concrete and humming ventilation units. A chain-link fence, rusted in places, was the only thing separating the roof from a dizzying drop to the street below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. The city sprawled out before him, a glittering, indifferent beast. Izuku walked to the edge, his fingers curling around the cool, rough metal of the fence. The wind whipped at his hair and clothes, a lonely, wailing sound. Down below, life went on. Cars moved like blood cells through the city's arteries. People hurried along sidewalks, tiny and insignificant. None of them knew he was up here. None of them would care. He pressed his forehead against the fence, the diamond-shaped pattern imprinting on his skin. He closed his eyes. The ruined notebook was still clutched in his hand, cold and damp. He didn't want to die. The realization was a sharp, clarifying shock. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live. He wanted to matter. He wanted the power to stand up, to fight back, to pull people from the wreckage and tell them, "It's okay now." Why? Because I am here. A single, hot tear escaped his tightly shut eye and traced a path down his cheek. Then another. Soon, he was sobbing, silent, racking sobs that shook his entire body. It wasn't the quiet, apologetic crying he did in his room. This was a primal scream of the soul, a raw, unfiltered agony that he had kept locked away for a decade. And with the agony came a wish. A prayer. A desperate, hopeless bargain with a universe that had never listened before. Please, he thought, the word a blazing inferno in his mind. He squeezed the notebook so hard his knuckles turned white. Please, I'll do anything. I don't care what it takes. I don't care what it costs. I'll give up anything. Everything. Just give me a chance. Give me the power to save people. I don't need to be the greatest. I don't need to be number one. I just want to be able to look someone in the eyes when they're scared and make them feel safe. I want to be their hero. His desperation was a physical thing, a torrent of raw psychic energy pouring out of him. It was the accumulated pain of 1,000 insults, 1,000,000 sneers, a lifetime of being told he was worthless. It was the fierce, unyielding purity of his heroic dream, burning brighter and hotter for all the attempts to extinguish it. It was a cry of such profound longing and selfless intent that it tore through the veil of the mundane world. It did not reach any god or benevolent spirit. It did not attract the attention of a passing hero. Instead, it rang out in the unseen dimensions that brush against the skin of the world like a dinner bell for the things that lurk in the dark, and one of them heard it. The first thing Izuku noticed was the cold. Not the simple chill of the evening wind, but a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was seeping into his bones. The ceaseless hum of the city traffic below seemed to fade, replaced by a profound, unnerving silence. The vibrant colors of the sunset bled away, leaving the sky a bruised, washed-out gray. A smell drifted to him on the unnatural wind, the scent of rain on old pavement, of cheap tobacco, and something else, something acrid and metallic, like old blood and ozone. "Bloody hell, turn it down, will you?" The voice was a low, gravelly rasp, thick with an accent Izuku couldn't place. It sounded like sandpaper and regret. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He whirled around, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was no longer alone. Leaning against a large ventilation unit, as if he had been there the entire time, was a man. He was tall and lanky, dressed in a rumpled, tan trench coat that looked like it had seen better decades. Underneath, He wore a loosely buttoned white shirt and a carelessly knotted black tie. His blonde hair was messy, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows, stubble dusting his jaw. He looked exhausted, the kind of soul-deep weariness that comes from seeing too much of the world's ugly underbelly. But it was his eyes that held Izuku captive. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they seemed impossibly old, filled with a cynical amusement and a profound sadness. They looked at Izuku not as a boy on a roof, but as something else entirely, a phenomenon, a curiosity, a problem. The man took a long drag from a cigarette held between two nicotine-stained fingers, the cherry glowing like a malevolent red eye in the gloom. He exhaled a plume of smoke that didn't dissipate in the wind but seemed to cling to the air around him. Who are you? Izuku stammered, taking a half-step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the fence behind him. Are you a hero? A security guard? The man let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. Hero? Oh, you couldn't be more wrong, lad. And security? Not my department, thank Christ. He took another drag of his cigarette. Name's John Constantine. And you, son, are a bloody lighthouse in a hurricane. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process the situation. This man wasn't a hero. He didn't have the costume, the physique, the bright, reassuring smile. He looked more like a down-on-his-luck private detective from an old movie. And his words made no sense. A lighthouse? Izuku repeated, confused. I don't understand. Constantine pushed himself off the ventilation unit and took a slow step forward. His movements were languid, almost lazy, but carried an undercurrent of coiled tension, like a predator at rest. That great big bleeding heart of yours, Constantine said, gesturing vaguely at Izuku's chest with his cigarette. That a hero at all costs. It'll do anything wailing and gnashing of teeth you were just doing. In my world, that sort of thing, it makes a noise. A very loud, very tasty noise for some very nasty things. He paused, his ancient eyes scanning the rooftop, then the sky above. I was in the neighborhood tracking a nasty little parasite. A sorrow-eater. Feeds on despair, gets fat on shattered hope. I was about to lay a trap for it, and then you turned on the bloody all-you-can-eat buffet sign. He looked back at Izuku, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. It's on its way, you know, drawn to you like a shark to blood. Izuku's mind, the same analytical mind that catalogued hero statistics and quirk weaknesses, kicked into overdrive, trying to find a logical explanation. A villain with a psychological quirk? A prank? But the unnatural cold, the silence, the sheer wrongness of the man standing before him, none of it fit. You're talking about magic, Izuku whispered, the word feeling foolish and childish on his tongue. Constantine's lips twisted into a smirk. Magic, he scoffed, as if it were a dirty word. That's what the storybooks call it. I call it the bloody nuts and bolts of the universe, the stuff that was here before quirks and will be here long after you heroes have all blown each other up. It's the grammar of suffering, the physics of desire. And right now, your desire is screaming its head off. He took another step closer. Izuku could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, the faint, silvery scars that traced patterns on the back of his hands. This man had been in fights, but not the kind that left simple bruises. I don't believe you, Izuku said, though his voice lacked conviction. He wanted to run, but his feet felt nailed to the concrete. Constantine sighed, a weary, put-upon sound. He raised his free hand, palm up. All right, you want a show? Fine. He snapped his fingers. The sound was shockingly loud in the silence. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the cherry of his cigarette flared, not red, but a sickly, violent green. The flame detached itself and hovered in the air between them, twisting and writhing like a living thing. It cast dancing, distorted shadows on Constantine's face, making him look demonic. Within the green flame, Izuku could see images swirling, a laughing skull, a grasping hand, a weeping eye. Izuku's breath hitched. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were biological, explainable, even the strange ones. They followed a certain logic. This was something else, something ancient and wrong. The green flame vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the cigarette glowing a normal red once more. "Believe me now, kid?" Constantine asked, his tone flat. Izuku could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Fear was a cold, sharp thing in his gut, but beneath it, a tiny, dangerous spark was kindling. This was power, real, tangible power, and it had come to him when he had cried out for it. "So," Constantine said, taking a final, deep drag before flicking the cigarette butt over the side of the roof. It fell, a tiny ember disappearing into the abyss. "Here's the rub. That prayer of yours? I'll do anything. I'll pay any price. The universe, she listens to promises like that. And she always collects. What you've done is put a hook in your own soul and cast the line into the dark. Now you've got two options. You can wait for whatever slimy, tentacled bastard takes the bait first. Or you can deal with the devil you know." He gestured to himself with a wry, self-deprecating flourish. Izuku stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with a terrifying clarity. This man wasn't here to save him from the Sorrow Eater. He wasn't here by chance. He was answering the prayer. "Why?" Izuku finally managed to ask, his voice trembling. "Why would you help me?" Constantine studied him for a long moment, his gaze intense. Izuku felt like he was being dissected, his soul laid bare on a slab. "Every magician I've ever met wanted power for the same boring reasons," Constantine said slowly, his voice losing some of its mocking edge. "Wealth, immortality, knowledge, revenge, the usual shopping list of human greed. They're all predictable. They all fall into the same traps. They all end up as screaming stains on the cosmic wallpaper." He took a step closer, until he was just a few feet away. "But you're different. I can feel it. You're drowning in pain, kid. You're at the absolute bottom of the barrel, and yet, when you begged the universe for a lifeline, you didn't ask to be strong for your own sake. You didn't ask for revenge on the little git who torched your notebook. You asked for the power to save other people." He shook his head, a look of genuine, baffled curiosity on his face. "It's the most stupid, naive, ridiculously pure thing I've heard in a century. It's insane. And frankly, it interests me." Izuku's mind raced. This was a crossroads. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to go home, to forget this ever happened. This man was dangerous. The air around him felt toxic, charged with secrets and sorrows. He was everything a hero was not: cynical, shadowy, and selfish. But he was also the only person who had ever looked at Izuku's quirkless state and not seen an end. He saw potential. He was offering a hand, reaching down into the pit Izuku had been trapped in his whole life. It was a grimy, blood-stained hand, but it was a hand nonetheless. What was the alternative? To go back to his life? To being Deku, the useless dreamer? To a future of quiet desperation, of watching heroes on TV and knowing he would never be one of them? To face Bakugo tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that? No. He couldn't. He wouldn't. "You said there's a cost," Izuku said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He met Constantine's gaze directly. "What is it?" A slow, predatory smile spread across Constantine's face. It was not a reassuring sight. "Oh, it's the best part, lad. The cost is everything you're not willing to pay. It's memories. It's bits of your soul. It's the color of the sky on a perfect summer day. It's your own humanity, chipped away piece by piece. Quirks are a free lunch. Magic is a banquet where you're always on the menu. Every spell is a transaction. Every miracle is a debt. It will chew you up and spit you out a stranger to yourself." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I can teach you things that would make your number one hero's hair curl. How to bind a shadow to your will. How to whisper a secret into a man's heart from a mile away. How to draw a circle of protection in your own blood that can turn away things that would give nightmares. I can give you the tools, but using them, that will carve you up from the inside. It's a mug's game, kid. The house always wins. The only question is how much you can get away with before they cash in your chips." Izuku thought of the people he wanted to save. The nameless, terrified faces in the news reports of villain attacks. He thought of a world where he could stand between them and the danger, and not be the one who needed saving. He thought of the smile he wanted to give them, a real, genuine smile that said, "I am here." What was the color of one sunset compared to that? What was a piece of his soul, if he could use it to shield someone else's? He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. The fear was still there, a block of ice in his stomach. But for the first time in a very, very long time, it was joined by something else, a flicker of hope. A terrible, dangerous, exhilarating hope. "Okay," Izuku said, his voice clear and steady. The word felt momentous, a line drawn in the sand of his life. "I accept. Teach me." For a moment, Constantine just stared at him. The cynical smirk faded, replaced by a look of profound melancholy. He looked at Izuku as if he were seeing a ghost, or a memory of someone he once knew. The moment passed in a heartbeat. The smirk returned, sharper than before. He reached into his trench coat and pulled out a slightly crushed pack of silk-cut cigarettes and a tarnished silver lighter. He lit a new one, the flame casting his face in a brief, hellish glow. "Right then, lad," he said, the smoke curling around the words. Lesson 1. He took a step back, creating a small distance between them, his weary blue eyes glinting with a dark, pitiless wisdom. He gave Izuku a wry, humorless smile. "Never trust a man who offers you the world." He took a drag from his cigarette, letting the smoke trickle from his lips as he spoke the final, damning words. "Especially me." The world Izuku Midoriya had known his entire life was one of bright colors and clean lines. It was the gleaming chrome of city skyscrapers, the primary color pop of hero costumes, the reassuring, sanitized order of modern society. The man named Constantine led him away from all of that. He followed the lanky, trench-coated figure through a labyrinth of Mizurufu's forgotten back alleys, places where the city's polished veneer had cracked and peeled away. The air grew thick with the smell of damp refuse and stale ramen. The cheerful glow of downtown was replaced by the flickering, sickly hum of failing neon signs for businesses that had been shuttered for years. They passed no one. It was as if this part of the city existed in a pocket dimension, a wrinkle in the map that people instinctively avoided. Their destination was a condemned pachinko parlor. Its facade was a riot of faded, peeling paint depicting cartoon animals with unnervingly wide eyes. The glass of the front door was shattered, boarded up with splintered plywood on which someone had scrawled, "No future, home sweet home." Constantine muttered, more to himself than to Izuku. He didn't bother with the door. Instead, he led Izuku around to a rusted service entrance at the side, the door held shut by a heavy, corroded chain and a padlock that looked older than Izuku himself. Constantine didn't produce a key. He simply placed 2 fingers on the lock, whispered a single, guttural word that sounded like grinding rocks, and the lock clicked open with a puff of rust-colored dust. Izuku's eyes widened, but he said nothing. He was quickly learning that questions would be answered with sarcasm, or not at all. Constantine swung the heavy door open, revealing not the derelict interior of a gaming hall, but a steep, narrow staircase leading down into absolute darkness. A wave of air washed over them, carrying a scent that made Izuku's stomach clench. It was the smell of a damp cellar, yes, but layered with the ozone tang of a lightning strike, the cloying sweetness of strange incense, and the faint, coppery smell of old blood. "Mind the threshold," Constantine said, not looking back. "Things like to linger. And wipe your feet, I'm not your mother." He descended into the gloom. Hesitantly, Izuku followed. The moment he crossed the threshold, the doors swinging shut behind him with a deafening boom, the world changed. The distant sounds of the city vanished completely. The air grew heavy, pressing in on him, making the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. It felt like stepping out of the world and into a sealed tomb. A single, bare bulb flickered to life overhead, sputtering and humming. It cast a weak, yellow light that did more to create shadows than to dispel them. They were in a basement. The walls were rough-hewn stone, weeping with moisture. The floor was cracked concrete, and in the center stood a rickety wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. But it was the details that made Izuku's breath catch in his throat. Scrawled on the floor, the walls, even the ceiling, were complex, overlapping geometric patterns and symbols drawn in what looked like chalk, salt, and something that was a dark, rusty red. Strings of knotted black twine were stretched across the corners of the room, tiny, tarnished brass bells hanging from them. Shelves lined one wall, crammed with dusty glass jars containing murky liquids and unidentifiable objects suspended within. Skulls of small animals sat next to stacks of what looked like handmade tarot cards. This wasn't a hideout. It was a fortress. It was a church dedicated to a dark and forgotten god. "Right then, have a seat," Constantine said, waving a hand at one of the chairs as he shrugged off his trench coat and tossed it over another. He looked utterly at home in the oppressive atmosphere. "School's in session." Izuku sat down gingerly on the edge of a creaking wooden chair. He placed his ruined, still damp notebook on the table. It seemed pathetic and childish in this grim, ancient place. He had expected something else. Flashy gestures, incantations, maybe a glowing crystal ball. He had imagined a crash course in becoming a hero, albeit a strange one. Instead, Constantine dropped a book on the table in front of him with a heavy thud that sent a cloud of dust into the air. The book was massive, bound in cracked, featureless leather. There was no title on the cover. The pages were yellowed, brittle parchment, and the text within was not Japanese, or even English. It was a dense, spidery script of alien characters, interspersed with disturbing diagrams of human anatomy overlaid with celestial charts. What is this?" Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That," Constantine said, lighting a cigarette and leaning back in his chair, smoke curling from his nostrils, "is your primer. Sumerian. Pre-Babylonian dialect. The language the first fool who tried to bargain with a demon probably used. Most of the foundational pacts are written in some variation of it. You want to understand the rules of the game, you've got to learn the language the rules were written in." Izuku stared at the impossible text. "But I can't read this. It would take years. Decades. You've got till sunrise to get the first 10 pages. Constantine said, his tone utterly dismissive. "Don't memorize. Understand. The grammar, the syntax. Every one of those little squiggles is a concept, a piece of cosmic law. Learn to feel the shape of them in your head." He tapped his temple. "This isn't school, kid. You don't pass a test. You either get it, or you get your soul eaten by a pronoun. Now, shut up and read." And so Izuku's training began. It was not a montage of exciting discoveries and growing power. It was a grueling, mind-numbing, soul-crushing slog. The hours bled into one another in the windowless basement, the only measure of time the steady depletion of Constantine's cigarette pack. The book was more than just a language. As Izuku stared at the strange symbols, they seemed to shift and writhe in his peripheral vision. Headaches blossomed behind his eyes, sharp and blinding. The words didn't just sit on the page. They fought back, resisting comprehension. It felt like trying to read the source code of reality, a language not meant for human minds. He would ask a question, and Constantine would sneer. "Why does this symbol for binding look so similar to the one for imprisoning?" "Because they're the same bloody thing, you Burke. One's just got better marketing. Everything is a cage, kid. Just a matter of who holds the key." Days turned into a week. Izuku barely slept. He ate cheap convenience store noodles that Constantine would procure on his rare trips outside, leaving Izuku locked in the warded basement. He grew pale, with dark circles under his eyes. His mind felt stretched thin, frayed at the edges. He started seeing the symbols from the book when he closed his eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness. He learned more than just dead languages. Constantine would lecture him in rambling, nicotine-fueled monologues, pacing the small room like a caged animal. He laid out the fundamental laws of his world, what he called the plumbing of the universe. "First thing you gotta get through your thick, hero-worshipping skull is intent," he'd say, jabbing a finger at Izuku. "It's not enough to want something. A baby wants a biscuit. A dog wants a scratch. That's weak. Pathetic. Real magical intent is focusing your entire being, every fiber of your soul, every scrap of will you possess, on a single outcome, to the exclusion of all else. You want to light a candle with your mind? You have to become the fire. You have to want that wick to burn more than you want to breathe. Most people can't manage it. Their heads are too full of noise. Bills, girls, what's on the telly? Your head's full of all might and saving the world. Useless, sentimental crap. You need to learn to clear the slate. Then came sympathy. Like effects like. The map is not the territory, but it's got its phone number. A photograph of a man isn't the man, but it's a reflection of him. It holds a piece of his light. A lock of his hair is even better. A drop of his blood? Now you're cooking with gas. The universe is a great big spiderweb, kid. Everything's connected. The trick is finding the right strands to pluck to make the whole bloody thing vibrate the way you want. And finally, the most important lesson, the one he hammered home again and again, with a kind of grim relish. Equivalent exchange. This is the big one, Izuku. The one rule you can never, ever break. Nothing is free. Nothing. Your whole world is built on a lie. People are born with these quirks. It's a gift, a genetic lottery win. They get to shoot fire from their hands or fly through the sky for free. It's unnatural. It breaks the fundamental balance of the cosmos. Magic is honest. It's a transaction. The universe is the ultimate loan shark. It will give you anything you ask for, but the interest is a killer. You want to move an object? You pay with your own energy, your own stamina. You want to heal a wound? You pay with a piece of your own life force, or you push that wound onto something, or someone else. You want to know the future? The universe will show you, but it'll take a piece of your past in return. It always balances the books. Always. Izuku absorbed it all, his analytical mind desperately trying to categorize and understand. But it was all theory. Abstract. He hadn't truly understood the weight of it until the night Constantine decided it was time for his first practical lesson. Right, Constantine announced, stubbing out a cigarette on the floor. You've got the basic grammar down. Time for your first sentence. He cleared the table, pushing aside the ancient tomes. He drew a small, intricate circle on the tabletop with a piece of chalk, the symbols within it familiar to Izuku now, though they still made him uneasy. He placed a simple clay bowl filled with dark, still water in the center of the circle. Scrying, Constantine said, looking into the reflecting pool. Simple, basic, and a perfect way to teach you about the cost. Izuku leaned forward, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a nervous excitement. This was it. Real magic. The water is the window, Constantine explained, his voice low and serious for once. But a window needs a light to see by. You need to power the ritual. Fuel it. And the best fuel, the most potent, is always personal. Emotional. It has to be something that matters. He looked Izuku dead in the eye. You need to give it a memory. Izuku blinked. A memory? That's what I said, isn't it? Not just any memory. Not what you had for breakfast. It has to be a happy one. Clear. Full of emotional resonance. The universe is a sentimental bastard. It loves the taste of joy. Find a memory. The first one that comes to mind. A good, strong one. Izuku's mind, without his bidding, immediately went to a place of pure, unadulterated happiness. He was 4 years old. He was sitting on the floor of his living room, watching the All Might debut video for the 100th time, his eyes wide with wonder. His mother came in, holding a brand new set of pajamas. They were bright blue, with a ridiculous yellow crest and little fabric tufts that looked like All Might's hair on the hood. He had gasped, a sound of pure joy. His mother had laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and helped him into it. He remembered the soft, new fabric against his skin. He remembered her hands warm and gentle, zipping him up. He remembered looking at his reflection in the dark screen of the television and seeing a tiny, perfect hero staring back. He remembered the feeling of boundless, unconditional love and the absolute certainty that he, too, would be a hero just like that one day. It was the memory of the moment his dream was born. Got one? Constantine asked, his voice pulling Izuku from the past. Izuku nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Yes, good. Now here's what you do. You're going to hold that memory in your mind. Every detail. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the feeling. And you're going to offer it to the water. You're going to push it out of you and into the bowl. You'll know when it takes. A cold dread began to seep into Izuku's bones, chilling him more than the damp basement air. What do you mean, give it? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. What happens to it? Constantine's expression was flat, his eyes holding no sympathy. You're paying for a service, kid. You give the cashier the money, you don't get to keep it in your wallet, do you? Now get on with it. The spirits don't like to be kept waiting. Izuku hesitated. That memory was precious. It was a cornerstone of his entire identity. To give it up, it felt like a betrayal. But he looked at Constantine's implacable face. He remembered the rooftop, the desperation, the promise he had made to himself. I'll do anything. Taking a shaky breath, he closed his eyes. He brought the memory to the forefront of his mind. The blue of the pajamas. The sound of his mother's laugh. The warmth of her hug. The swelling pride in his chest. He focused his intent, just as Constantine had taught him, pouring all his will into the act of offering. He pictured the memory as a warm, golden ball of light in his mind, and then, with a silent, wrenching effort, he pushed it forward, out of himself, towards the bowl of water on the table. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt a pull. It was a horrible, hollow sensation, like a hook had been sunk deep into his mind and was now being violently ripped out. A sharp, psychic pain lanced through his skull, and he cried out, clutching his head. It felt like a piece of his brain was being surgically removed without anesthesia. The water in the bowl began to shimmer. The surface stirred, though there was no breeze, and a faint, silvery light began to glow from its depths. Constantine leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. It's taking. Don't break focus, lad. See it through. Izuku gritted his teeth, tears of pain streaming from his eyes. He pushed harder, forcing the last vestiges of the memory out. The feeling of love, of hope, of his mother's warmth, it all drained away, leaving a cold, aching void behind it. And then, with a final, sickening lurch, it was gone. The light in the bowl flared. The surface swirled, and images began to form, murky and indistinct at first, then coalescing with a nauseating clarity. He saw slime. Green, viscous, suffocating slime. He heard the muffled sound of frantic, desperate explosions. He smelled the stench of a sewer. He saw a pair of terrified, furious red eyes, Bakugo's eyes, staring out from the morass, pleading for help that wasn't coming. He felt a phantom sensation of suffocation, of his lungs burning for air that wouldn't come. He saw heroes standing by, unable to act. Then, he saw a flash of green running forward, a figure he recognized with a jolt as himself, a red backpack swinging wildly. The vision shattered. The light in the bowl died, and the water became dark and still once more. Izuku slumped back in his chair, gasping for breath, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His head throbbed with a dull, empty ache. He felt hollow. Violated. Well, look at that, Constantine said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. A proper little oracle you are. You saw that, didn't you? A proper glimpse of things to come. Izuku didn't answer. He was trying to do something else. He was trying to remember. He reached back in his mind for that golden memory, for the comfort of his mother's love. He found it. Sort of. He could recall the facts. My mother bought me an All Might onesie when I was 4. He knew it had happened, like a line in a history book. He could picture the pajamas, but the color seemed faded, washed out. He could remember the event, but the emotions connected to it were gone. Completely. The warmth, the joy, the fierce, burning hope, they were absent. It was like looking at a faded black and white photograph of a stranger's birthday party. He knew, intellectually, that the people in it were happy, but he couldn't feel it. The memory was a husk, a hollowed-out shell with the life inside it scooped out. The horror of what he had done washed over him in a sickening wave. He had just sold a piece of his childhood, a piece of his love for his mother, for a few seconds of a terrifying, confusing vision. He looked at his hands, expecting them to be stained, to be different. He felt different. He felt tainted. What have I done? He whispered, his voice cracking. Constantine lit another cigarette, the flare of the lighter illuminating his grim face. You've paid the toll, kid. That's all. You just learned, in the most personal way possible, the first law of everything. You don't get something for nothing. He blew a stream of smoke towards the ceiling. That's the difference between you and them. Between what we do and what your precious heroes do. They get to throw their power around with no thought to the consequences, no price to pay. They're like spoiled rich kids spending daddy's money. They have no concept of value, because they've never had to earn a bloody thing. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, the cigarette dangling from his lips. His blue eyes were as cold and sharp as chips of ice. This, he said, gesturing to the bowl, to the books, to the grim basement around them, is a world of consequences. It's a world of debt and payment. It's dirty. It's painful. It will take everything from you if you let it. That's why it's a tool of last resort, Izuku. You don't use a spell to stop a purse snatcher. You don't use it to pass a test or impress a girl. You save it for when you're backed into a corner. You save it for when the heroes have failed, the walls are coming down, and the only thing standing between someone's life and a monster from the pit is you and a book of forgotten words. He took a final drag and crushed the cigarette under his heel. What you felt just now? That hollowness? That's the cost. Every time you use this power, you will pay a price. A piece of you will be chipped away, so you'd better make damn sure that what you're buying is worth the piece of yourself you're spending. Izuku stared at the bowl of dark water, his reflection a pale, haunted stranger. The horror was still there, a knot of ice in his gut. But beneath it, Constantine's words were sinking in. He thought of the vision. He saw Bakugo's eyes again, filled not with arrogance, but with pure, animal terror. He saw the heroes standing by useless, and he saw himself, quirkless and powerless, running in anyway. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that if he were in that situation right now, he would be just as helpless as he was in his memory of the vision. He would die, and so would Bakugo. But now he had another option. A terrible, costly option. But an option. He looked up from the bowl and met Constantine's gaze. The horror was still there. The regret was a bitter taste in his mouth. But they were joined by a cold, grim resolve. He had paid a price. He had learned the grammar of this new, dark language. And the first word he had learned was suffering. His own. Okay, Izuku said, his voice hoarse but steady. What's the next lesson? The weeks that followed Izuku's first, harrowing lesson in practical magic settled into a strange and punishing routine. By day, he was Izuku Midoriya, a ghost haunting the halls of Aldera Junior High. He sat in class, mechanically taking notes, the words of his teachers a meaningless drone compared to the arcane secrets he was deciphering by night. The taunts from Bakugo and his cronies still came, but they no longer struck with the same force. The words were stones thrown against a fortress wall. They clattered and fell away, unable to breach the new, grim perimeter he had built around himself. He had touched a world so much older and more dangerous than their petty schoolyard cruelty that it had fundamentally recalibrated his sense of fear. He was quieter now, more watchful. The frantic, nervous energy that had once defined him had been banked, replaced by a still, coiled intensity. Sometimes Bakugo would catch Izuku's eye across the classroom, and for a split second, he wouldn't see the pathetic, trembling Deku he knew. He'd see a stranger looking back. Someone whose eyes held the weary depth of a man who hadn't slept in a week and had seen things in the darkness that could not be unseen. It was unnerving, and it made Bakugo's anger burn hotter, fueled by an unfamiliar flicker of confusion. By night, Izuku descended into the warded basement that had become his true classroom and his cell. The air, thick with the scent of old paper, ozone, and Constantine's ever-present cigarette smoke, was more familiar to him now than the air in his own bedroom. He spent countless hours poring over books bound in human skin, memorizing the subtle inflections of Enochian curses, and practicing the precise, geometric art of sigil craft. His hands, once soft and ink-stained from his hero analysis, were now calloused and perpetually smudged with chalk and charcoal. He would spend hours on the concrete floor, drawing and redrawing complex diagrams, wards of protection, circles of binding, sigils meant to disrupt or contain. Constantine was a merciless tutor. A single misplaced line, a symbol drawn with a moment's hesitation, would earn him a harsh cuff to the back of the head and a scathing lecture. "Sloppy work gets you killed, kid," the man would rasp, pointing a nicotine-stained finger at a shaky line. "You think a demon's going to give you points for effort when it's peeling the skin from your bones? That circle isn't a suggestion. It's a legal document written in the language of creation. Get a comma out of place, and you've just signed your own bloody death warrant. The hollowness from the scrying ritual remained a constant companion. He would see his mother in the mornings, her smile warm and loving, and a pang of guilt would strike him. He knew, with an academic certainty, that he loved her more than anything. But the raw, vibrant feeling of that love, the one he had sacrificed, was now a muted echo. It was as if he were viewing his own life through a pane of thick, slightly distorted glass. He was there, but he was no longer fully present. It was the first price he had paid, and its phantom ache served as a constant, terrifying reminder of the path he had chosen. He was walking home from another one of these draining, dual-lived days, his mind still tracing the intricate patterns of a containment ward he'd been struggling with, when the world exploded. A deafening boom ripped through the afternoon air, shaking the very pavement beneath his feet. A plume of black smoke billowed into the sky from a shopping district just a few blocks ahead. People screamed. Car alarms blared their panicked chorus. Izuku's head snapped up, the arcane symbols vanishing from his mind, replaced by a decade of ingrained instinct. Trouble. A villain attack. Before he could even think, his legs were moving, carrying him towards the chaos. It was a reflex he couldn't control, the hero fanboy overriding the budding occultist. He joined the stream of morbidly curious onlookers, pushing his way through the growing crowd until he broke through to the front. He was met with a scene of pure pandemonium. A narrow commercial street was on fire. Storefronts were shattered, and flames licked up the sides of the buildings. In the center of the inferno, a monstrous form thrashed and churned. It was a villain made of viscous, foul-smelling green sludge, its body a chaotic, amorphous mass with two malevolent yellow eyes floating within. It was a living cesspool, a nightmare-given form. The heroes were already on the scene, but they were helpless. Kamui Woods was there, but he couldn't get close, his wooden limbs would instantly incinerate. The powerful Death Arms was trying to clear debris, but he had no way to land a solid punch on the fluid villain. Empty Lady was present, but the street was far too narrow for her to use her gigantification quirk without bringing the entire block down. Backdraft was fighting a losing battle against the spreading flames, his water quirk only causing the sludge to splash and spread further. They were stymied. The textbook response to a villain attack was failing right before Izuku's eyes. The crowd murmured in a mixture of fear and excitement, their phones held up to record the disaster. And then Izuku saw it. Trapped within the swirling, suffocating mass of sludge was a person. A teenager. He could see a thrashing arm, the spiky blonde hair so familiar it made his heart stop, the flashes of desperate, contained explosions. It was Bakugo. The sight hit Izuku like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He saw Bakugo's face for a brief, horrifying moment. The usual arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, primal terror. His red eyes, wide and wild, were pleading. He was choking, drowning, his own powerful quirk being used against him to fuel the fires that kept the other heroes at bay. He was going to die. A cold wave of dread washed over Izuku, so potent it was almost nauseating. He looked at the heroes, standing there, waiting for someone with the right quirk to show up. He looked at the crowd, watching a boy suffocate as if it were a television show. And he looked at Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the one who had told him to take a swan dive off the roof, and saw only a terrified kid who was seconds away from death. The system was failing. The heroes were failing. A voice, low and gravelly, echoed in the back of his mind. Constantine's voice. You save it for when the heroes have failed, the walls are coming down, and the only thing standing between someone's life and a monster is you. His mind, a strange hybrid of a hero analyst and a student of the dark arts, began to race. He analyzed the situation with a terrifying new clarity. The villain's strength was its weakness. It had no solid form, no internal structure, no vital organs to target. It was pure, fluid chaos. How do you fight chaos? You don't fight it, another of Constantine's lessons whispered. You don't overpower it. You impose order on it. You find its grammar, and you insert a full stop. He thought of the containment ward he had been practicing just an hour before. It was too complex, it would take too long to draw. But there were simpler forms. Rudimentary sigils, magical punctuation marks, as Constantine called them. Curses and bindings weren't always elaborate rituals. Sometimes they were a single, focused concept given form. He remembered a specific one from a dusty, leather-bound tome. The Sigil of Interruption. It wasn't designed to destroy or banish, but to introduce a single, jarring moment of stasis into a dynamic system. To make a river stop flowing, if only for a second. To make a fire forget to burn, if only for a heartbeat. The cost. His mind instantly went to the price. It wouldn't require a memory. This was a direct, kinetic act of will. It would require a personal, sympathetic link. Blood, and it would require a payment of energy. His own life force burned as fuel. It would hurt. It would leave a mark, not on his skin, but on his soul. He looked at Bakugo's terrified eyes. Take a swan dive. Despite everything, despite the years of pain, the answer to the silent question in his soul was immediate and absolute. Yes. It's worth it. He didn't know he was moving until he was past the police barrier. A hero shouted at him. Hey kid! Get back here! It's too dangerous! But Izuku didn't hear him. The world seemed to narrow, the roar of the fire and the screams of the crowd fading into a dull hum. His focus was absolute. It was the intent Constantine had described. His entire being, every fiber of his soul, focused on a single outcome, create a single moment of order in that chaos. His legs, a lifetime of hero worship and a new, desperate purpose propelling them, carried him forward. His mind was a blur of calculations. He needed a catalyst, a distraction. He swung his bright yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it at the villain. It was a pathetic, childish gesture, but it was also a perfect piece of misdirection. The heavy textbook inside struck one of the villain's floating eyes, causing the creature to recoil for a precious half-second. It was all the time he needed. He didn't charge in blindly. He dropped to one knee just at the edge of the inferno's heat, his hand darting to his pocket. He didn't carry a magic wand or a mystical amulet. He carried a small, sharp-edged piece of granite he'd picked up from a construction site, a simple, practical tool for what he needed to do. He didn't hesitate. He drew the sharp edge of the rock across the palm of his left hand. The pain was searing, real, and wonderfully grounding. It cut through the panic, focusing his mind to a razor's edge. Blood, dark and vital, welled up instantly. The world seemed to slow down. While the heroes and the crowd saw a foolish, suicidal boy, Izuku was performing a desperate, high-stakes surgical operation on reality itself. He pressed his bleeding palm to the grimy asphalt. The heat from the nearby fires was intense, but he barely felt it. With his right index finger, he began to draw in his own blood, his movements swift and certain from hours of practice on the basement floor. He drew a perfect circle. Inside it, a sharp, angular line bisected by another, creating 4 quadrants. In each quadrant, he drew a smaller, hook-like symbol, each one a conceptual anchor for stasis and interruption. It was a glyph of pure, conceptual force. It meant simply stop. As the final line connected, he pushed his will, his life force, into the sigil. He felt a sickening, draining sensation, as if a tap had been opened at the base of his soul. The world swam before his eyes, and a wave of icy coldness spread from his chest outwards, a stark contrast to the fire raging around him. This was the cost, paid in full. The sigil on the ground flashed, not with the heroic golden light of All Might, but with a deep, unsettling violet. The light wasn't bright. It was a strange, absorbing darkness that seemed to drink the firelight around it. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, a sound no one else seemed to hear. The effect was instantaneous and utterly bizarre. The sludge villain seized, its fluid body, which had been churning and thrashing, locked into place. It didn't freeze solid. It stuttered, like a corrupted piece of digital film. Its form flickered and distorted, every drop of slime momentarily bound by an invisible, geometric law it could not comprehend. For one complete, impossible second, the monster made of chaos was trapped in a state of absolute order. 1 second was all it took. In that moment of paralysis, Bakugo, freed from the crushing pressure, managed to take a single, ragged gasp of air. With that breath, he unleashed the most powerful explosion he could muster, a desperate, point-blank blast of concussive force from both palms. Boom! The explosion, combined with the sigil's effect suddenly wearing off, was devastating. The villain's semi-solid form was blown apart, the sludge scattering and splattering against the street and buildings. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise. The fire still burned, but the central threat was gone. Bakugo collapsed to his knees, coughing and gasping for air, covered in grime but miraculously alive. For a moment, everyone, the heroes, the crowd, Bakugo himself, was frozen in stunned disbelief. Then the world came rushing back. The heroes surged forward, securing the weakened villain and tending to Bakugo. Others began to douse the remaining flames with more efficiency now that the source was contained. Izuku was on his hands and knees, his head spinning, the palm of his left hand throbbing with a ferocious, unnatural ache. The violet light was gone. The bloody sigil on the pavement was already drying into a meaningless, dark brown smear. Then the scolding began. Death Arms and Kamui Wood stormed over to him, their faces a mixture of relief and fury. "What were you thinking, kid? Are you insane? You could have been killed. That was the most reckless, idiotic thing I've ever seen. You're lucky you're not a puddle on the street right now." Izuku didn't have the energy to respond. He let them lecture him, their words washing over him. He had done it. It had worked. The cost had been high. He felt weak, drained, and a part of him felt colder than it had before. But Bakugo was alive. He had saved him. Across the way, paramedics were checking on Bakugo, who was now on his feet, shrugging them off. His furious, confused eyes found Izuku's. There was no gratitude in them. Only a burning, humiliated rage. To be saved by Deku, the useless, quirkless pebble in his path. It was the ultimate indignity. And he hadn't understood what he'd seen. He just felt the pressure lessen for a moment, seen a weird purple light out of the corner of his eye. It was a cheat. A trick. He didn't know how, but Deku had cheated. As Izuku was being led away by the exasperated heroes, he failed to notice a skeletal, emaciated figure watching from the edge of the crowd. Toshinori Yagi, his body racked with coughs, had seen the whole thing. He had been about to transform, to intervene, his time limit be damned. But then the quirkless boy had run in. Toshinori had seen the bravery, the same selfless, reckless heroism that was the hallmark of every true hero he had ever known. But he had seen something else, too. He had seen the boy drop to one knee. He'd seen the flash of strange, violet light. He'd seen the villain freeze in a way that defied physics and quirk mechanics. He had been the #1 hero for decades. He had seen tens of thousands of quirks. What he had just witnessed was not a quirk. It wasn't a support item. It was something else. Something ancient and alien to the world of heroes he governed. It was this mystery, this anomaly, as much as the boy's incredible bravery, that propelled him to follow Izuku after the crowd had dispersed. He found him on a quiet side street, trudging home, looking small and exhausted. "I am here!" The booming voice made Izuku jump. He turned to see his idol, All Might, in all his Golden Age glory, standing at the end of the street. And then, in a puff of smoke, the hero deflated into the skeletal man he'd seen at the edge of the crowd. The reveal was shocking, but Izuku's mind was still reeling from the events of the last hour, still numb from the expenditure of his own life force. He listened as All Might explained his injury, his time limit, the truth behind the smile. But when All Might began to praise him, the words had a different weight. "Of all the heroes on the scene, it was you, a young man without a quirk, who acted. You spurred me to action." All Might's voice was filled with admiration. Then, his tone shifted, becoming more serious, more inquisitive. "But I have to ask, young man, what you did back there. I saw you throw your bag, but then, there was a light." The villain stopped. "That wasn't just a distraction, was it?" "What was that?" Izuku froze. The moment he had dreaded had arrived. He had to lie to his idol. He was a terrible liar. "Oh. That?" he stammered, his mind racing. Constantine's first lesson echoed in his head: never trust anyone. Especially me. That rule extended to everyone else, too. "It was a support item. A prototype. My own design." He wanted to slap himself. It was the lamest excuse imaginable. "It's a kinetic disruption grenade." It releases a specialized energy pulse to momentarily seize up fluid matter. It was a one-time use thing though. Yeah, totally expended now. Lucky I had it right, he cringed internally. The lie was so thin it was transparent. All Might stared at him for a long, searching moment. Tashinori was no fool. He knew the kid was lying. The light he'd seen hadn't come from a grenade, it had come from the ground, from the boy's own hand. But he also saw the genuine terror in the boy's eyes, not the fear of a villain, but the fear of someone guarding a dangerous secret. And overlaying it all was the undeniable, radiant spirit of a true hero. He decided, against his better judgment, to let it go. For now. The spirit was what mattered. Young man, All Might said, his voice soft but firm. You told me before that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I came here to correct you. He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes burning with intensity. You can become a hero, the words. They were the words Izuku had longed to hear his entire life. A month ago, they would have reduced him to a sobbing, grateful mess. Now, they landed differently. He had already found a path to power, a dark, costly one. And here was another, a bright, shining path offered by the sun itself. His heart swelled with a joy so fierce it almost eclipsed the cold spot in his soul. But the joy was tangled with a new, complicated fear. He listened, his heart pounding, as All Might told him of his quirk, of its sacred history. One for all. A power passed from person to person, a torch of hope against the darkness, a crystallized stockpile of pure heroism. I believe you are worthy of inheriting my power, All Might declared, his hand outstretched. Izuku looked at his own hands. His right, clean and unmarked. His left, bandaged now with a handkerchief, the palm throbbing with the memory of a bloody, violet-tinged sacrifice. He was standing at a fork in the road of his own soul. He could choose the path of light, or continue down the path of shadows. But why did it have to be a choice? Yes, Izuku said, tears finally streaming down his face. They were tears of joy, of relief, but also of a terrible, burgeoning apprehension. Yes, I accept. Later that night, long after he had left All Might and promised to meet him for training, Izuku made his way back to the condemned pachinko parlor. He needed to talk to the only person in the world who might understand the impossible situation he now found himself in. He descended the stairs into the warded basement. Constantine was there, leaning back in his chair, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey on the table next to him. He didn't look up as Izuku entered. So, Constantine said, taking a slow sip from the bottle. You've had a busy day, I hear. Caused a bit of a ruckus downtown. Wasted a perfectly good binding concept on that overgrown bully. Sloppy, but effective. For a novice. You saw? Izuku asked, his voice hoarse. I see a lot of things. Constantine grunted. Part of the job. He finally looked up, his pale blue eyes pinning Izuku in place. But that's not the interesting bit, is it? The interesting bit came after. Izuku took a deep breath. All Might. He offered me his quirk. It's called One for All. It's a power that can be passed on. He chose me. He expected Constantine to be angry, or dismissive, or perhaps even impressed. He was not prepared for the reaction he got. Constantine started to laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a loud, harsh, grating laugh that echoed off the damp stone walls. He threw his head back and roared, a sound completely devoid of humor and filled with a deep, bottomless, cosmic irony. He laughed until he started coughing, pounding a fist on the table. Oh, that is bloody brilliant! He finally wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. Perfect! Of all the bleeding hearts in this godforsaken country, the universe decides to give the holy grail of heroism to my grubby little apprentice of the dark arts. You couldn't write this stuff. I don't understand, Izuku said, unnerved by the display. It's a good thing, isn't it? It's the power to save people. Constantine's laughter died, replaced by a deadly serious expression. He leaned forward, the bottle forgotten. A good thing? Kid, do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you know what happens when you pour bleach into a bottle of ammonia? Izuku shook his head. You get a cloud of chloramine gas that melts your lungs from the inside out. A catastrophic chemical reaction, Constantine explained, his voice a low, dangerous growl. And you brilliant idiot, have just agreed to do that inside your own soul. He stood up and began to pace. What I'm teaching you, this magic, it's a transaction. It's fueled by sacrifice, by pain, by bargains with forces that would consider a black hole a pleasant neighbor. It's about bending the rules of the universe, twisting them until they scream. It's a power source that runs on cost. It leaves a stain. He stopped and pointed a trembling finger at Izuku's chest. And this one for all? From what I can feel coming off you now, just the dregs of the offer, it's the exact opposite. It's a battery, a great big, shining battery made of hope and self-sacrifice and all that other heroic bollocks. It's a power source that runs on virtue. It's a quirk that is the rules of heroism made manifest. He walked back to the table and slammed his hand down, making the jars on the shelves rattle. You are planning to run two completely incompatible, philosophically opposed power sources through the same shoddy wiring, your body and soul. The hopeful energy of that quirk could try and burn my teachings out of you like a fever. The corrosive nature of the occult could poison that precious gift, turning it into something twisted and monstrous. Best case scenario, they neutralize each other, and you're back to being a useless git. Worst case? They detonate. And there won't be enough of you left to haunt a public toilet. Izuku stood frozen, the magnitude of his decision crashing down on him. He had wanted power so desperately that when the universe had offered it to him twice, from two different, warring pantheons, he had greedily accepted both. He looked at his bandaged left hand, feeling the dull ache from his sacrifice. Then he thought of All Might's hopeful, shining eyes. He had the power of the gutter and the power of the stars, and they were now at war inside him. I can't turn it down, Izuku whispered, his voice filled with a new, terrifying determination. I have to be a hero. Constantine stared at him, the cynical mask falling away for a second to reveal a flicker of something that looked almost like pity. I know, he said, his voice quiet. That's the bloody tragedy of it. He picked up his whiskey and took a long swallow. Well, don't come crying to me when your soul starts bleeding out of your ears. Your training just got a hell of a lot more complicated. Izuku stood in the silence of the basement, the weight of two worlds settling on his shoulders. He was the chosen successor to the symbol of peace, and the reluctant student of a master of the dark arts. He had his dream, but it was now bound to a nightmare. He was on his way to becoming a hero, but he might have just damned himself to get there. The next 10 months were a crucible designed to forge a hero, but for Izuku Midoriya, it was a schizophrenic existence, a life lived in two warring realities. His days were spent under the brilliant, hopeful sun with All Might. His nights were spent in the suffocating, secret darkness with Constantine. Each teacher demanded everything he had, pulling his body, mind, and soul in opposite directions. The training with All Might began at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a sprawling landfill that had become a monument to societal neglect. It was the perfect metaphor for what All Might intended to do: take something discarded and broken and make it strong and clean again. The aim to pass, American Dream Plan, was brutal in its simplicity. Izuku was to haul refrigerators, drag tires, and move mountains of trash, all to sculpt his frail, adolescent body into a vessel worthy of receiving the immense power of One for All. All Might was a surprisingly meticulous, if unorthodox, coach. He was all booming encouragement and fatherly pride, pushing Izuku with a relentless optimism that was as exhausting as it was inspiring. Eat more! Sleep more! And push beyond! Plus ultra! He would shout, his skeletal form perched atop a mountain of rusted appliances, a stopwatch in hand. Izuku threw himself into the physical training with a desperate fervor. Every aching muscle, every scraped knuckle, every lungful of salty, trash-scented air was a penance. He was building his body, but he was also trying to build a foundation of pure, honest heroism to contain the dark knowledge festering within him. He felt like a man building a beautiful house on top of a cursed graveyard, hoping the strong floors and bright windows would be enough to keep the ghosts at bay. He would finish his days with All Might, his body a symphony of agony, muscles screaming in protest, only to drag himself to the condemned pachinko parlor for his real lessons. Constantine had been grimly fascinated by the emergence of One for All. He treated it like a dangerous, unknown variable introduced into a complex equation. So the big lug wants you to get swole before he passes on the holy hand grenade, does he? The occultist had grunted on the first night after Izuku had explained the training regimen. Smart for a bloke who wears his underwear on the outside. Raw power needs a strong container, whether it's kinetic or ethereal. But a strong body isn't enough for what you're trying to do. Your soul is still a bloody leaky bucket. Constantine's training was the antithesis of All Might's. It was not about building, but about controlling. Not about strength, but about resilience. He forced Izuku to meditate for hours in the center of a complex chalk circle, his only task to feel the thrum of the building power of One for All, still just a promise, a seed yet to be planted, and consciously separated from the faint, cold whisper of his own budding magical potential. You've got 2 engines in a 1-engine car, kid, Constantine explained, pacing around the circle, smoke trailing from his cigarette. You need to learn to build a firewall between them, keep the heroic sunshine and rainbows power on one side, and the nasty, blood and brimstone stuff on the other. Let them touch, and the whole thing goes kaboom. The mental and spiritual strain was immense. Izuku's nights were filled with esoteric study, memorizing the subtle differences between demonic hierarchies, learning the alchemical properties of graveyard dirt, and most importantly, mastering the art of the ward. Wards, Constantine drilled into him, were not just for keeping things out. They could also be used to keep things in. They could regulate, absorb, and redirect energy. As the months wore on and Izuku's body began to change, his skinny frame replaced by lean, hard-won muscle, the day of the quirk transfer loomed. A new, terrifying problem presented itself. Even with all this muscle, Izuku panted one evening, collapsing on the sand after hauling a defunct washing machine. All Might says my body might still explode. The first time I use the power, it could be too much. My arms and legs could blow off. All Might, in his skeletal form, nodded grimly. It's a possibility, young Midoriya. One for All is a raging inferno. We have built you into a strong vessel, but even the strongest steel can shatter under enough pressure. Your resolve on that day will determine the outcome. Resolve. The word chilled Izuku to the bone. He had plenty of resolve, but his body was still human. He took this problem to his other teacher. Constantine listened, a thoughtful, calculating look on his face. He took a long drag from his cigarette. Explode, eh? Messy. Inefficient. He stared at Izuku's newly muscular arms, not with pride, but with the appraising eye of an engineer looking at a faulty piece of equipment. Your blonde and blue god is thinking like a hero, he said with a sneer. Brace for impact. Hope for the best. It's a stupid way to handle a bomb. The smart way isn't to build a stronger box, it's to build a release valve. And so, a new phase of his training began. Under Constantine's exacting instruction, Izuku began the painstaking process of creating a set of regulator wards. It was a delicate, dangerous fusion of ancient artifice and modern quirk theory. He had to design a series of sigils that would act as magical shock absorbers, specifically tuned to the unique energy signature of One for All, an energy he hadn't even fully experienced yet. He had to rely on the faint echoes he could feel growing within him, and Constantine's own unnerving ability to perceive the nature of the quirk. It's pure, this power, Constantine had muttered once, his eyes distant. Annoyingly, obnoxiously pure. Like staring into the sun, we need something that can bleed off the excess heat without extinguishing the flame. The final design was a complex, interlocking series of glyphs that spiraled out from a central point. They were designed not to negate the power, but to absorb the kinetic blowback, the destructive recoil All Might had warned him about. But, as always, there was a cost. The energy has to go somewhere, kid, Constantine explained as he laid out the tools for the final step, a sterile needle, a bowl of specially prepared black ink mixed with silver dust and a single drop of Izuku's own blood, and a small, faintly glowing stone that hummed with a low, magical thrum. The wards will take the physical kickback that would shatter your bones, but they'll convert it into raw, untamed magical energy. And since your body is the circuit, you'll be the one to ground it. It won't break you. But it's going to hurt. A lot. It'll be a clean burn. A fire on your soul instead of a shatter in your bones. The week before the UA entrance exam, the beach was finally clean. The sun rose over a pristine shoreline, sparkling on the blue water. Atop the last pile of garbage, Izuku stood, screaming his triumph to the sky. All Might, in his magnificent hero form, looked on with tears of pride in his eyes. He plucked a single hair from his head. "Eat this," he commanded. Izuku, choking down his disgust and overwhelming emotion, did so. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt it. A great, warm, thundering power surged through him, a feeling like 1,000 sunrises blooming in his veins. It was the legacy of 8 heroes, a chorus of courage and sacrifice, and it settled deep within his core, a sleeping giant waiting for his call. That night, in the basement, the final preparations were made. Izuku sat, stripped to the waist, while Constantine, with the unnerving precision of a surgeon, began the ritual. The needle was enchanted, glowing with a faint blue light, making it less painful but no less invasive. He began to tattoo the regulator wards onto Izuku's arms. The ink was alchemically treated to be invisible under normal light. It would only appear, Constantine explained, when activated by a massive surge of power. The process was agonizing. It wasn't the physical pain of the needle, but a deep, resonant ache as the magical symbols were permanently etched into his skin, his very life force. It felt like his arms were being dipped in ice and fire at the same time. He gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead, focusing on the image of Yue's gates to get him through it. By the time Constantine was finished, Izuku was shaking and pale, his arms throbbing with a phantom energy. There was no visible mark, but he could feel the wards, a cold, complex architecture lying dormant just beneath his skin. He was now permanently, secretly marked by his tutelage. He was a weapon, modified in the shadows for a war he was only just beginning to understand. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of his dream school, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. He felt the immense, borrowed power of One for All humming within him, a vast, untapped ocean. He also felt the cold, alien presence of the wards on his arms, a secret he had to carry alone. He nearly tripped on his own feet, only to be saved by a kind, brown-haired girl with a gravity-defying quirk. The encounter was a brief, welcome flash of normalcy in his increasingly strange life. Inside the auditorium, present mixed loud, energetic presentation barely registered. Izuku's focus was inward, on the 2 warring powers he was about to unleash for the first time. The practical exam began, and the massive gates swung open, revealing a sprawling, artificial cityscape. The other applicants exploded into action, a dazzling display of quirks. Lasers, explosions, engines, and mutations were all on display as students began racking up villain points. Izuku was left in the dust, frozen. It's one thing to have the power, he thought, panic rising. It's another thing to use it. He ran, desperately searching for a target, but the other, more experienced students were too fast. He was getting 0 points. He was going to fail. The dream was slipping through his fingers. Then, the ground began to shake. From around a corner, the 0-pointer appeared. It was a Goliath, a skyscraper-sized robot that towered over the cityscape, its single red eye glowing with menace. It was an obstacle, not a target, a gimmick designed to be avoided. The other students screamed and fled. Izuku turned to run with them, but a cry for help stopped him cold. Pinned under a pile of rubble was the nice girl who had saved him earlier. Her leg was trapped, and the 0-pointer was lumbering directly towards her, its massive shadow falling over her. In that instant, 10 months of training, both physical and arcane, converged. The world went silent. All Might's voice echoed in his head. Clench your butt cheeks and scream this from the bottom of your heart. Constantine's voice was a cold whisper right beside it. Intent. Become the outcome. There is no try. The image of the girl, helpless and terrified, ignited the furnace of One for All. He didn't think. He acted. He pushed off the ground, the dormant power roaring to life. He shot into the air, a green blur of lightning and raw force, soaring hundreds of feet in a single, impossible leap. He was airborne, rocketing towards the 0-pointer's massive head. He drew back his right fist, the power of 8 heroes converging into a single point. He could feel his bones begin to creak, his muscles strained to the point of tearing under the immense, untamed energy. The inferno was about to consume its vessel. But then, the release valve opened. As One for All reached its absolute peak, the invisible tattoos on his right arm flared to life. A web of intricate, violet lines blazed across his skin, glowing with an otherworldly light that was visible even in the bright afternoon sun. The sigils drank the kinetic recoil, the explosive blowback that would have turned his arm into a red mist. The pain was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't the sharp, shattering pain of a broken bone. It was a clean, searing agony, as if his entire arm had been plunged into a vat of liquid nitrogen and then set on fire. It was the feeling of his very essence being burned as fuel. The violet light of the wards intensified, and a low, dissonant hum, like a struck tuning fork from a madman's orchestra, vibrated through the air around him. He screamed, a sound that was half heroic war cry and half soul-tearing shriek of pain. Smash! His fist connected with the zero-pointer's head. The result was apocalyptic. A shockwave of pure power erupted from the point of impact, crumpling the robot's thick metal plating like a tin can. Its head imploded, and the entire colossal structure buckled and collapsed, a decommissioned god falling to its knees. Izuku was suspended in the air for a moment, his objective complete. He looked down at his arm. It wasn't broken. It wasn't a mangled ruin. It was whole, but it was glowing with the faint, purple afterimage of the wards, and it felt numb, disconnected. The searing pain subsided into a deep, cold ache that seemed to emanate from his very marrow. Then gravity remembered it existed. He began to plummet, his body limp, his legs broken from the initial jump. He was going to die. He had saved the girl but was about to become a splat on the pavement. He closed his eyes, accepting the cost. A sharp slap to his cheek brought him back. The girl, free from the rubble, had used her quirk on him, making him weightless just before he hit the ground. He landed with a gentle, anticlimactic bump. The exam was over. He had 0 villain points, but he had saved someone. As Recovery Girl healed his broken legs, the other students looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear. They had seen the green lightning of the punch, but many had also seen the flicker of alien purple light that had wrapped around his arm. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was strange. He had passed. He had made it into UA, but the true test was only just beginning. A few weeks later, on his first day in Class 1A, the true nature of his new conflict began to manifest. It was during their first foundational heroics class, when All Might himself made his dramatic entrance. Izuku was overwhelmed, thrilled to be in the presence of his mentor, and now teacher. The first time it happened was subtle. As All Might spoke, Izuku felt a strange resonance within him. The power of One for All seemed to stir, to bask in the presence of its former wielder. It was a warm, comforting feeling. But accompanying it was a cold, prickling sensation, a static crawl at the back of his soul. It was the presence of his magic, recoiling from the sheer, concentrated heroism of All Might like a vampire from a crucifix. The two forces inside him were acknowledging each other, and they were not friendly. The real trouble started later, in the quiet of his own mind. He was in his room that night, trying to sleep, his body buzzing with the excitement of the day. As he drifted into the liminal space between waking and dreaming, he found himself somewhere else. He was standing in a vast, misty gray void. Before him, seated in a semicircle of shadowy chairs, were figures made of smoke and memory. They were faint, their features indistinct, but he could feel their presence, their power. He recognized one immediately, a woman with long, floating hair and a kind, sad smile. Nana Shimura. He had seen her in pictures. These were the vestiges. The previous users of One for All. He had expected a welcome, a meeting of spirits. Instead, he was met with a wall of suspicion and fear. Their ghostly forms flickered, agitated. They weren't speaking in words, but in feelings, impressions that flooded Izuku's mind. Unclean. Tainted. What is that shadow clinging to him? This is not the way. The feelings were a cacophony of rejection. They could sense the stain of Constantine's teachings, the cold, alien architecture of the wards etched into his soul. They felt the echo of the blood he had spilled, the memory he had sacrificed. To them, these things were anathema, a corruption of the sacred power they guarded. Nana Shimura's form solidified slightly, her spectral eyes filled with a deep, profound horror. Her impression was the strongest, the most cutting. This is the power of a villain. This is the path to ruin. You are poisoning the wellspring, child. Her fear and anger were a palpable force, pressing in on him. He felt like an intruder, a heretic in his own soul. He tried to project his own feelings, his own intent. I'm doing this to be a hero, to save people. But his thoughts were drowned out by their collective alarm. This was the true cost, he realized. More than the pain, more than the sacrifice. It was isolation. He was alone even in the company of his own power. He had accepted a gift, but its guardians now saw him as a threat. He felt a crushing despair begin to settle over him. He had fought so hard to get here, had paid so much, only to be rejected by the very source of his new hope. Then, a new presence made itself known. From the edge of the circle, a figure stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his form more solid, though his face was still a shifting mask of shadow. A single point of light glowed in his chest, the origin point of one for all. The first user. He did not radiate the same fear or anger as the others. Instead, Izuku felt a powerful wave of curiosity, of calm, analytical observation. The first user raised a shadowy hand, and the agitated chattering of the other vestiges subsided. His impression was not in words, but in pure concept. It was a complex, layered thought that unfurled in Izuku's mind. This power is not evil, the first conveyed. It is other. It is ancient. It is the power of the cost. The quirk is the power of the gift. They were not meant to coexist. There was a pause, a moment of deep, silent consideration. But the boy's heart, the intent, remains true. The first user did not offer acceptance, not yet. But he did not offer condemnation either. He offered neutrality. He offered observation. He was a scientist presented with an impossible paradox, and he was willing to see the experiment through. His calming presence was enough to push back the tide of rejection from the others. The scene began to fade, the misty void dissolving back into the familiar shadows of Izuku's bedroom. Izuku sat bolt upright in bed, his heart hammering in his chest, cold sweat clinging to his skin. He was the 9th user of One for All. But he was not a welcome successor. He was an anomaly, a ghost in the machine of his own quirk. He was a hero in training who walked a line no one else could see, with the ghosts of heroes judging his every step from within, and the devil he knew waiting for him to fall in the world without. The path to becoming a hero was proving to be a lonelier and more perilous road than he could ever have imagined. The atmosphere in the ground beta training facility was electric. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the faux cityscape in sharp, clean lines. It was a perfect, pristine stage for the grand theater of heroics, a place built for epic clashes and triumphant victories. For the students of Class 1A, clad in their brand new, custom-designed costumes, it was the first real taste of the dream they had all been chasing. Izuku stood among his classmates, feeling deeply, profoundly out of place. His costume, a simple green jumpsuit with a large, slightly manic grin on the face guard and long, floppy ears, had been designed by his mother. It was a loving, if slightly embarrassing, tribute to his idol, All Might. It was the costume of the hero he had always wanted to be, bright, hopeful, and straightforward. It felt like a lie. Beneath the cheerful green fabric, his arms throbbed with a faint, cold hum from the regulator wards. They were a secret, alien architecture hidden under the skin of his heroic aspirations. He felt like a man wearing a priest's cassock over a suit of armor forged in hellfire. The dissonance was a constant, low-grade hum at the back of his mind. All Might, in his full, glorious hero form, stood before them, his presence filling the vast space. Welcome, my young heroes, to the most important class at UA High. It's time for battle training, his booming voice echoed, and a thrill went through the class. This was it. The real deal. All Might explained the exercise, an indoor, 2-on-2 battle. One team would be the heroes, tasked with infiltrating a building and capturing a prop nuclear weapon. The other team would be the villains, sworn to protect it. It was a classic, fundamental heroic scenario. Now, let's see what fate has in store for you. All Might declared, reaching into a box to draw the lots. First up, these guys. He held up 2 balls. One was marked with the letter A, the other with the letter D. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in Izuku's stomach. Team A was Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. Team D was Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. The universe, it seemed, had a sick sense of humor. A hush fell over the other students. Everyone knew the history, the toxic, one-sided rivalry that defined the relationship between Midoriya and Bakugo. To have them face off in the very first training exercise felt less like a coincidence, and more like a cruel, calculated inevitability. Izuku's eyes met Bakugo's across the observation room. Bakugo's face was a mask of incandescent rage. His lips were pulled back in a silent snarl, his crimson eyes promising a world of pain. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was pest control. It was his chance to utterly annihilate the quirkless, useless Deku who had somehow cheated his way into UA, and had the gall to possess a power he couldn't explain. Izuku felt a tremor of his old fear, the reflexive, deeply ingrained terror of the boy who had been his tormentor for a decade. But it was different now. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was data. Another variable in a complex equation. He looked at his partner, Uraraka. She was trying for a brave smile, but her eyes were wide with worry. "Wow, what are the odds?" she said, her voice a little too bright. "It's gonna be intense going up against Bakugo, but we'll do our best." Her simple, earnest optimism was a lifeline. It reminded him of the hero he was supposed to be. "Right," he said, forcing a determined nod. "We will." As they were led to the staging area outside their designated building, All Might's voice crackled in their earpieces. "Team A will be the heroes, Team D the villains. Villains, you have 5 minutes to prepare. Then the heroes will infiltrate. The trial begins now." Inside the observation room, the other students watched the monitors. "This is gonna be rough," Kaminari commented, wincing. "Bakugo's been like a walking thundercloud ever since the exam. And he's got Midoriya in his sights." "Midoriya's quirk seems powerful, though," Kirishima countered, his arms crossed. "He destroyed that zero-pointer. It might be a good match." Only Todoroki remained silent, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on the screen showing Izuku's nervous face. He had seen the punch, but he had also seen the flicker of strange violet light. Something was off about Midoriya. He wasn't just a simple powerhouse. Outside the building, Izuku's mind was racing, a frantic whirlwind of heroic strategy and occult tactics. Uraraka was looking at him expectantly, waiting for a plan. "So, Bakugo will probably come straight for me," Izuku began, his analytical mind clicking into gear. "He's not subtle. He'll want to fight me one-on-one. Ida is the smart one, he'll stay with the weapon. He's fast, but his quirk is best in straight lines. The building has 5 floors, tight corners. That works against him." This was the hero analyst, the boy who had filled 13 notebooks with quirk data. It was his comfort zone. "So you'll draw Bakugo away, and I'll use my zero-gravity to sneak past Ida and find the bomb?" Uraraka suggested, her eyes lighting up. "That's a good plan." It was a good plan. A classic hero plan. It was also a plan that would get him hospitalized. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't win a straight fight against Bakugo. Not yet. One for All was a live grenade in his hands. His first and only use of it had resulted in a spectacular, self-destructive display that had left him with 3 broken limbs. Even with the regulator wards, unleashing a 100% smash was a weapon of last resort, a suicide attack. And he didn't know how to use it in smaller, controlled bursts yet. He hadn't mastered full cowling. In a direct confrontation, Bakugo, with his years of combat experience and masterful control over his powerful quirk, would tear him apart. He could try to run, to lead Bakugo on a chase. But Bakugo was fast, agile, and his explosions gave him incredible mobility. He'd be cornered eventually. A direct fight was inevitable under a heroic rule set, and a cold, cynical voice whispered in the back of his mind. Constantine's voice. "Heroic rules are for suckers, kid. You're not here to have an honorable duel. You're here to win. The goal isn't to beat the opponent. The goal is to secure the objective. Stop thinking like a hero. Start thinking like a survivor." He looked at the building, A 5-story concrete box. He looked at Uraraka's trusting face. He thought of Bakugo's unrestrained rage. A different kind of plan began to form, a shadowy, intricate thing built not on power, but on deception. It felt dirty. It felt wrong. It was also their only real chance to win. Change of plan, Izuku said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more focused, more serious. We're still going to split up. But I'm not going to fight him. I'm going to play with him. Uraraka looked confused. Play with him? Bakugo's anger is his greatest weapon, Izuku explained, the words feeling alien and calculating on his tongue. But it's also his biggest weakness. He's not thinking about the objective. He's thinking about me. We're going to use that. I'm going to lead him on a wild goose chase, make him think he's got me cornered, and keep him so distracted, so furious, that he forgets you even exist. Your job is to be silent, be invisible, and get to that weapon. The timer buzzed. The infiltration had begun. They slipped in through a first-floor window, the interior of the building a maze of empty corridors and stark, concrete rooms. The air was tense, unnaturally silent. Remember, Izuku whispered to Uraraka, his green eyes intense. Stay out of sight. Don't engage either of them unless you have no other choice. Good luck. She gave him a determined nod and, touching the walls to make herself lighter, sprinted silently down a side hallway, vanishing into the shadows. Izuku was alone. He took a deep breath, the filtered air of his mask tasting stale. He closed his eyes for a second, focusing his intent. He wasn't here to fight a battle. He was here to conduct an orchestra of misdirection. It didn't take long. He had barely made it to the central stairwell when a figure rocketed around the corner, propelled by a blast of orange fire. Bakugo. He came in hot, his right hand already sparking, a predatory grin stretched across his face. DKU! He roared, his voice echoing in the confined space. I've been waiting for this. No more of your cheap tricks. Let's see what that flashy quirk of yours can really do before I blast you back to whatever rock you crawled out from under. He lunged, his hand outstretched for a massive, close-range explosion. Izuku didn't try to meet it with force. He did what he had always done when faced with Bakugo's wrath. He dodged. He sidestepped, letting Bakugo's blast scorch the wall where he had been standing. But this time, as he dodged, his left hand subtly brushed against the concrete wall. His fingers, already smudged with a bit of chalk he'd kept hidden in a small pouch on his belt, traced a single, rapid symbol. It was a simple glyph, a minor cantrip Constantine had taught him for emergencies, the sigil of amplification. It didn't create sound. It only magnified existing sound and focused it on a single point. Izuku fled down the hallway, Bakugo hot on his heels, whooping with triumphant rage. That's it, Deku. Run! You were always good at that. Izuku ducked into an empty room, pressing himself into a dark corner behind the door. He held his breath. Bakugo, moving too fast, blasted past the doorway. He skidded to a stop a few feet down the hall. Hiding, you coward? He snarled, turning back. Izuku, from his hiding spot, put 2 fingers to his lips and whispered, his voice barely audible. Over here. The sound traveled silently down the hall, striking the sigil he had drawn. The glyph flared with a faint, almost invisible light and acted like a psychic megaphone. The whispered words, over here, erupted from a point on the ceiling at the far end of the hallway, sounding loud, clear, and taunting. Bakugo's head snapped in that direction. Got you! He yelled, firing a blast down the empty corridor, convinced Izuku was hiding around the next corner. While Bakugo was distracted, Izuku slipped out of the room and sprinted back towards the stairwell, climbing silently to the second floor. In the observation room, the other students were baffled. What was that? Ciro asked, leaning forward. Did you guys hear that? It sounded like Midoriya's voice came from down the hall. Bakugo's just shooting at nothing, Sato added, scratching his head. Is Midoriya toying with him? All Might watched, his permanent smile fixed, but a deep frown line was etched between his brows. This wasn't the heroic, head-on clash he had expected from his successor. Young Midoriya was being evasive, cunning. It was effective, but it felt unheroic. Bakugo, realizing he'd been tricked, let out a roar of pure frustration. He began stalking the hallways, more cautiously this time, his senses on high alert. Come out and face me, Deku! This isn't a game. Izuku, now on the third floor, was preparing his next move. He knew he couldn't keep using the same trick. He found a room filled with old office furniture, desks and chairs draped in white cloths. It was a perfect spot. He ducked behind a large metal filing cabinet, listening. He could hear Bakugo's heavy, angry footsteps on the stairs. He was getting closer. Izuku closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. He focused, drawing on the cold, quiet part of himself that Constantine had cultivated. He remembered a lesson on glamours, illusions of the mind, tricks of perception. He wasn't skilled enough to create a full-blown illusion, but he could manage a minor one. A flicker, a suggestion in the corner of the eye. It required no sigil, only focused intent and a small expenditure of personal energy. He felt that familiar, cold draining sensation, much weaker this time, but still present. Bakugo kicked the door to the room open, his eyes scanning the space like a hawk. He saw the draped furniture, the shadows in the corners. Nothing. I know you're in here, he shouted. As his eyes swept past the darkened corner behind a stack of chairs, Izuku released the glamour. For a split second, a flicker of movement registered in Bakugo's peripheral vision, a flash of green, the shape of a person ducking out of sight. It was an illusion, a lie whispered directly to his optic nerve. There you are! Bakugo screamed, firing a massive explosion into the corner, blasting the chairs to splinters and scorching the wall. The smoke cleared to reveal nothing. In the observation room, Mina Ashido gasped. Whoa! I could have sworn I saw him in that corner too. A feint? Tokoyami murmured, his own shadow-like quirks stirring in interest. A clever, if dishonorable, tactic. While the smoke from the blast still hung in the air, Izuku made his move. He bolted from behind the filing cabinet on the opposite side of the room, heading for the door. Bakugo, whirling around, saw him, his face twisted in a triumphant, furious grin. No more running! He yelled, leveling both gauntlets. He was about to unleash his super move, the collected nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms. All Might, you have to stop this! Kirishima shouted in the observation room. At this range, that blast could kill him. All Might gripped his console, his knuckles white. Young Bakugo knows the risks, but Izuku saw the gauntlets aimed at him. He knew he couldn't dodge. There was no time. This was it. He had to use one for all. But not as an attack. As a distraction. He braced himself, drew back his fist, and aimed not at Bakugo, but at the ceiling 5 stories above. He channeled a fraction of one for all into his arm, but instead of a smash, he tried to create a shockwave. The regulator wards on his arm flared, a brief, violet flicker. The pain was sharp, but manageable, a hot sting rather than a searing burn. He punched upwards. Delaware smash, air force. A cannon of pressurized air shot from his fist, slamming into the ceiling. It wasn't enough to do major structural damage, but it blew out the light fixtures and sent a shower of concrete dust and debris raining down between them. More importantly, it created a huge, deafening bang that momentarily overwhelmed Bakugo's senses. The world was a chaotic mess of falling debris, smoke, and noise. Bakugo, momentarily blinded and deafened, flinched. It was the opening Izuku had been waiting for. He didn't charge forward. He ran sideways, along the wall. As he passed Bakugo, who was still recovering from the sensory assault, Izuku did one more thing. He reached out and slapped another pre-drawn chalk sigil, this one on a small, sticky piece of paper, onto the back of Bakugo's gauntlet. The sigil of cacophony. A simple, nasty piece of work that created a loud, distracting noise. Then he was gone, out the door and sprinting up the final flight of stairs. Bakugo shook his head, his ears ringing. The dust was settling. Deku was gone. And then, a high-pitched, incredibly annoying squealing sound started emanating from his gauntlet. It was like 1,000 nails on 1,000 chalkboards, a constant, irritating shriek he couldn't turn off. What the hell? He roared, shaking his arm, but the noise persisted, rattling his teeth and shattering his concentration. Izuku burst onto the 5th floor, his arm aching, his ears ringing. He saw Ida standing guard over the papier-mâché bomb, his back to the door. He was monologuing, practicing his villainous role. And you'll never defeat me, heroes, for I, Tenya Ida, am the epitome of Uraraka, now! Izuku yelled. From behind the bomb, where she had been hiding silently for the entire match, Uraraka sprang up. Ida whirled around, shocked. What? Where did you come from? She slapped her hands on the bomb. Release! She shouted, activating her quirk. The massive prop weapon floated gently into the air. She then jumped, pushing off a pillar, and hugged the floating weapon to her chest. I've got it! She cried out. Downstairs, Bakugo heard the shout over the infernal squealing of his gauntlet. His head snapped up. The weapon. Uraraka. He had completely forgotten about them. He had been so focused on Deku, so consumed by his rage and the bizarre, frustrating chase, that he had utterly failed his mission as a villain. He had been played. DKU. His final scream was not one of triumph, but of pure, humiliated fury. Back in the bomb room, Ida, realizing his mistake, charged at Uraraka. But without a clear runway, his engines were clumsy. He was a bullet without a barrel. I'm sorry, Ida! Uraraka yelled as she floated over his head with the bomb. But... Hero team. Wyans! The buzzer sounded. A profound silence fell over the training ground. In the observation room, the students of Class 1A were speechless. They had just witnessed a complete and total tactical victory achieved with almost no direct combat. They had expected a slugfest, a titanic clash of powerful quirks. Instead, they had seen a ghost hunt, a magic show, a victory won through whispers and shadows. Momo Yaoyorozu was the first to speak, her voice filled with analytical awe. He never intended to fight Bakugo at all. Every move was a feint, a misdirection designed to manipulate Bakugo's emotional state and draw his attention away from the real threat. The sounds, the visual tricks, even the final blast, it was all a coordinated effort to create an opening for his partner. It was brilliant. But it wasn't very heroic, was it? Came Todoroki's quiet voice, his gaze still locked on the monitor showing Izuku, who was now leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. All Might's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding strained. The hero team wins. Later, after the exercise, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Bakugo was trembling, not with rage anymore, but with the cold, hard shock of being so thoroughly outmaneuvered. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been made a fool of. All Might gathered the class for the post-match analysis. He praised Ida for taking the role seriously and Uraraka for her stealth and execution. Then he turned to the two main combatants. Young Bakugo, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You are gifted with immense power and talent. But you let your personal feelings cloud your judgment. You lost sight of the objective. A true hero must be able to remain calm and tactical, no matter the opponent. Bakugo just stared at the floor, his fists clenched. Then, All Might turned to Izuku. The hero's smile was still in place, but his eyes were filled with a deep, searching concern. And young Midoriya. Your strategy was, without a doubt, incredibly effective. You understood your opponent's weaknesses and exploited them perfectly to achieve your goal with minimal damage. As a practical strategy, it was flawless. He paused, and the weight of his next words fell heavily on the entire class. However, he continued, his voice lowering, a hero's duty is not just to win. It is to inspire confidence and hope. Your methods, they were cunning. Deceptive. While you were never overtly villainous, your tactics relied on manipulation and tricks that one might expect from a different sort of person. Remember, the public must be able to trust you. They must see you as a pillar of straightforward strength and integrity. It was a gentle rebuke, but it cut Izuku to the core. He had won. He had protected his partner and secured the objective with almost no collateral damage. He had done everything a hero was supposed to do, except for the one thing that mattered most to All Might. He hadn't looked like a hero while doing it. He had fought like John Constantine. He had won the battle, but in the eyes of his idol, he had failed a more fundamental test. As he looked at the faces of his classmates, he saw their awe was now mixed with a hint of suspicion, a sliver of fear. He had revealed a part of himself, a cunning, manipulative side that didn't fit with his nervous, mumbling exterior. He had walked the razor's edge between the two worlds that claimed him, and for the first time, he had shown everyone which side he was willing to draw his weapons from when backed into a corner. He was a hero in training at the most prestigious hero academy in the world, and he had just won his first victory using the lessons of the gutter. And as he stood there, under the scrutinizing gaze of the symbol of peace, he felt more alone than ever.